Abraham never imagined that a tiny snail could put him in so much danger. But now, late at night in the quiet village of Agbada, he stood in the middle of the village square surrounded by angry faces. The villagers' eyes shone with fear and anger in the flickering light of their lanterns and torches. Abraham's heart pounded like a drum in his chest. He knew he was in very big trouble. What had he done wrong, and how would he ever get out of this? He could only tremble and wonder what would happen next, hoping this scary night would end soon. Welcome to Royal Beat Tales, a home of interesting and educative stories. Just a few weeks earlier, Abraham had arrived in Agbada full of hope and excitement. He had traveled far from his home in the north-central region of Nigeria to this small village in Delta State. Abraham came as a teacher to help at the village school, and the villagers welcomed him with smiles and warm food. The air in Agbada was hot and wet, and tall palm trees swayed in the breeze. Everything was new and different. The people spoke a language he was still learning, and children laughed at the funny way he talked sometimes. Abraham was nervous, but happy to begin his adventure. He didn't know that Agbada held a special secret that would soon test his courage and kindness, and he certainly didn't know the danger that secret would bring. Abraham settled into life in the village and quickly grew to love Agbada. Every morning he walked on a narrow dirt path to the little schoolhouse, ready to teach the children. The kids loved Teacher Abraham because he told cheerful stories and made them giggle by pretending to chase goats that wandered into the classroom. In the evenings, Abraham sat outside his small mud brick house under the orange sunset, listening to villagers sing folk songs. He learned new words in their language and made friends with his neighbors. Abraham noticed something curious, though. Snails were everywhere in this village after it rained, crawling slowly with their shiny shells, and the people of Agbada treated these snails very gently. Children would carefully move snails off the road so they wouldn't get hurt, and elders left bits of fruit leaves for them. No one ever talked about cooking or eating snails here, which Abraham found a little odd since in other places people did eat them. He didn't ask why, but in the back of his mind he wondered. Little did Abraham know that these small creatures were more than just snails to the villagers. They were sacred, and he was about to find out why in the hardest way possible. One lazy afternoon, after a long day of teaching, Abraham's stomach rumbled with hunger. He missed some of the foods from his home, and he remembered how his friend once made a delicious snail stew in a different town. Snail. Yes, maybe he could cook snails here too. He had seen plenty of big snails in the bushes around his house. Abraham thought it wouldn't hurt to try a little snail meal, not knowing this was a forbidden thing in Agbada. So he took a small basket and wandered to the edge of the forest. Under some wet leaves, he gently picked up a couple of plump snails, their shells glistening. He thanked the forest for the food, as his mother had taught him to always be grateful, and walked back home whistling, thinking about the tasty dinner he would have. In his tiny kitchen, Abraham cooked the snails in a pot with spices and vegetables. Soon a yummy smell filled the air, or at least Abraham thought it was yummy, though it did smell a bit strange and earthy. He didn't notice a neighbor peeking curiously through the window at the odd smell. Abraham sat down and began to eat the snail stew. It was a little chewy and slippery, and he made a funny face because the texture was strange, which would have made his little students laugh if they saw it. Still, he smiled, pleased with his cooking. Abraham had no idea that with each bite of snail, he was breaking the greatest taboo of Agbada. He was enjoying his dinner peacefully, not knowing that very soon his joy would turn into fright, as a terrible mistake revealed itself. Just as Abraham finished his meal, wiping his mouth with satisfaction, a small boy named Timmy came by his door. Timmy was one of Abraham's favorite pupils and often ran errands for the teachers. He had come to bring Abraham some fruits from his family's farm. Timmy opened the door with a bright grin, but the moment he stepped inside, he froze. His eyes widened at the sight of the pot, and the empty snail shells on Abraham's table. For a second, Timmy couldn't speak, and the basket of fruits tumbled from his hands onto the floor. "Snails," the boy finally squeaked, his voice high and terrified. "Teacher, did you eat the snails?" he cried out, his whole body starting to tremble. Abraham was confused by the look of horror on the boy's face. "Yes, I cooked them. Is something wrong?" he asked softly, reaching out to Timmy. But Timmy stumbled back, almost tripping, and then he turned and ran out of the house yelling, "He ate the sacred snails! He ate them!" Abraham's heart skipped a beat. Sacred snails? What was the boy talking about? He hurried to the door, but it was too late. Timmy's alarmed cries were ringing through the quiet evening, and Abraham could see villagers turning their heads and rushing towards his home. A cold wave of fear washed over him as he realized he must have done something terribly wrong. Abraham stood there in shock, hearing more and more footsteps and angry murmurs growing louder outside. He felt his hands begin to shake, and he wondered in panic what the villagers were going to do to him now. Within minutes, a crowd of villagers gathered around Abraham's little house. Mothers, fathers, elders, and children all were there, eyes wide with disbelief and fear. They saw the empty snail shells and the pot of soup on his table, and a few people began to cry or shout. One old man covered his face as if he couldn't bear to look. The village chief, a tall man with kind but stern eyes, arrived with his walking stick. He raised his hand and everyone fell silent, except for the crackling of the torches they carried. Abraham felt small and alone as the chief stepped forward and spoke in a grave voice. "Young man, is it true? Did you eat those snails?" Abraham's voice quivered. Yes, chief. I'm so sorry. I didn't know it was wrong." He felt tears welling up in his eyes. The chief's face was sad and angry at the same time. He shook his head slowly. Around him, the villagers whispered in their local language words that Abraham could not fully understand yet. But he caught some. Taboo, curse, punish. Abraham's knees felt weak. The chief finally said, "In Agbada, snails are not food. They are sacred beings. We never harm them. You have broken our most serious rule." The moment he finished speaking, a loud roll of thunder rumbled in the sky, even though there were no rain clouds overhead. The villagers looked up in fear. To them it was a sign that the spirits were angry. Abraham opened his mouth to plead again, but the villagers surged forward and grabbed his arms. "Please, I'm sorry," he cried, his heart pounding wildly. But no one was listening now. They were too frightened of what might happen because of Abraham's actions. In a daze of fear and regret, Abraham was pulled through the village towards the sacred meeting ground under a large ancient tree. He didn't resist. He knew he had done something very wrong without meaning to. As they gathered under the darkening sky, the wind picked up and swirled leaves around their feet. The chief and the elders circled Abraham, and the villagers formed a tight ring around them. Abraham stood in the center, shaking, as the chief prepared to decide his fate. All Abraham could see were the stern faces circling him, and he could barely breathe as he wondered what they would do next. The chief raised his hand to speak, but before he could utter a word, a sudden strange sensation swept over Abraham. His tongue felt tingly and heavy all at once. He tried to speak again, perhaps to beg for mercy, but no sound came out. Abraham's eyes widened in alarm. His mouth wouldn't work. Instead, a dribble of saliva slipped down his chin. He touched his throat, confused and growing more terrified. One of the elders noticed and shouted, "It's the snail's curse!" The crowd gasped in unison. Abraham's lips were moving, but he couldn't talk at all, not even a single word. It was as if his voice had been taken away. The villagers stepped back in fear, some covering their mouths. They had heard stories of this happening to anyone who broke the snail taboo. Abraham remembered those whispers about a curse and realized it might be coming true. Something truly bad was happening to him. He tried to stay calm, but his body began to shake and his legs wobbled beneath him. Two men rushed forward to hold him up so he wouldn't fall. Abraham's heart thudded and tears streamed down his face. He was so scared now, scared that he might stay like this forever, or even worse. The night air felt colder and the wind howled through the trees, as if the whole forest was upset. Abraham looked around at the faces of the villagers. Even though some were angry, many were also afraid for him. They believed the powerful snail spirit was punishing Abraham and could bring danger to everyone if they didn't act quickly. The chief hesitated, knowing time was running out to save the young man from the curse. Abraham wanted to scream, to apologize again, to do anything to fix what he had done, but he couldn't make a sound. He was utterly helpless, and the world seemed to spin. It felt like this nightmare would never end as a dreadful silence fell over the crowd, everyone wondering what could possibly happen next. Just when it seemed all hope was lost for Abraham, a clear, strong voice rose from the back of the crowd. "Wait!" All heads turned to see who had spoken. Through the circle of villagers stepped Mama Ejiro, the oldest woman in Agbada. Her back was bent with age, and she leaned on a cane carved with snail patterns. Mama Ejiro was the keeper of the village's deepest secrets and traditions. The firelight danced in her wise, gentle eyes as she made her way to the center where Abraham stood. The crowd parted quietly for her. Everyone respected Mama Ejiro. In her other hand, she carried a small clay bowl filled with something powdery and gray. She placed a comforting hand on Abraham's shoulder. Abraham was shaking and could only look at her with pleading eyes, a tear rolling down his cheek. Mama Ejiro looked at the chief and all the villagers gathered around. "This young man is not from here," she said firmly but kindly. "He did not know our ways. Yes, he has done wrong, but it was by accident. We must help him make it right." Some villagers murmured in reply, unsure. The chief frowned slightly but nodded for Mama Ejiro to continue. He trusted her wisdom. Mama Ejiro then announced, "We will perform the forgiveness rite now before the night grows too late." Abraham didn't understand all her words, but her tone was caring, and he felt a tiny bit of hope spark inside him. With everyone watching, Mama Ejiro took a pinch of gray ash from the bowl she carried. She gently rubbed the ash around Abraham's lips. It felt dry and dusty, but strangely, Abraham's numb mouth started to tingle warmly. The old woman then began to hum a low, soothing song. The villagers knew this song. It was a sacred lullaby to calm angry spirits. The night was very quiet except for Mama Ejiro's humming and the crackle of the torches. Abraham closed his eyes, tears still on his face, as that gentle humming wrapped around him. The crowd waited in tense silence, anxious to see if the powerful snail spirit would calm down and what Mama Ejiro would do next. Mama Ejiro's soft song drifted into silence, and she cleared her throat to speak. In a calm, story-like voice, she began to remind everyone of the old legend of Agbada. Abraham listened as best he could, his heart still racing. Mama Ejiro told the villagers, and also for Abraham to hear, why snails were so sacred to them. She spoke of a time long, long ago when Agbada was suffering from a terrible drought. The sun had baked the land dry, and the rivers had nearly disappeared. The people were thirsty, and plants would not grow. One day, Mama Ejiro said, a small snail appeared and led our ancestors to a hidden spring bubbling with fresh water. The snail saved our village from thirst. The villagers whispered softly, remembering the tale told to them as children. Abraham listened in awe, picturing a brave little snail showing the way to water. Mama Ejiro continued, "From that day on, our people vowed never to harm these helpful creatures. The snails carry the spirit of kindness and protection. They are our friends, not food. To eat a snail is to break trust with our oldest friend and anger the spirit that watches over Agbada." As Abraham heard this story, his eyes overflowed with tears. He now understood why everyone was so upset. He felt a deep ache of guilt in his chest and wished more than anything that he could take back his mistake. His tongue was still a bit numb, but Abraham managed to whisper in a cracked voice, I'm so sorry. I didn't know." The villagers saw the sadness and honesty in his eyes. Many of them softened their expressions, realizing that Abraham truly hadn't meant any harm. The chief let out a long breath and nodded slowly at Mama Ejiro. It was time to calm the angry spirit and save Abraham. Mama Ejiro took a ladle of water mixed with herbs from her bowl and gently poured a few drops into Abraham's open mouth. The mixture tasted bitter, but almost instantly Abraham felt warmth in his throat. He wiped the remaining drool from his chin. Thank you, he tried to say, and this time the words came, though weak and raspy. A tiny smile of relief appeared on Abraham's face as he regained his voice. The villagers watched closely, holding their breath. Would the spirit forgive him? They waited and hoped with all their hearts that the danger would pass and that Abraham would be saved in the end. For a long moment, the night was still and quiet. Abraham stood there, sniffing and drying his eyes, with Mama Ejiro by his side. The villagers and the chief watched him carefully. The wind stopped howling and became a gentle breeze that rustled the leaves overhead. Suddenly, a child in the crowd pointed at the ground and exclaimed, "Look!" Everyone followed the child's finger. From the dark grass at Abraham's feet, a little snail had crawled into the center of the circle. Its shell caught the moonlight as it inched right up to Abraham's shoe. Then, to everyone's amazement, the snail slowly climbed onto the tip of Abraham's shoe and sat there, peeking out from its shell. Abraham froze, not daring to move a muscle. He gazed down at the tiny creature. It waved its two small antennae curiously, almost as if it were studying the young man. Mama Ejiro began to laugh softly, and the chief's tense face finally broke into a smile. "It's a sign," Mama Ejiro said joyfully. "The snail spirit has forgiven Abraham." At her words, a cheer rose among the villagers. People clapped, and some even laughed with relief. Abraham let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Very carefully, he knelt down and offered his hand. The little snail crawled from his shoe onto his open palm. Its tiny body tickled Abraham's skin. "Thank you, little friend," Abraham whispered to the snail, his voice full of gratitude and wonder. He then gently placed the snail on a safe patch of grass by an old hibiscus bush. The chief stepped forward and helped Abraham stand up fully. "You are forgiven, my son," the chief said kindly, patting Abraham on the back. The villagers untied the rope from Abraham's wrists. They had tied his hands earlier when they were afraid he might run, but he never tried to. A few children, including Timi, ran up to Abraham and hugged him tightly, happy and crying because their beloved teacher was safe. Abraham smiled, tears in his eyes again, but this time they were tears of joy. The whole village was filled with happiness once more. One of the younger men in the crowd joked, "Teacher Abraham, next time you're hungry, just call us. We'll bring you dinner." "No more snail soup for you." The people laughed, and even Abraham chuckled, feeling lighter than a feather now. The dark, scary night had turned bright with torchlight and smiles. Under the ancient tree, the villagers of Agbada joined together and sang a gentle song to thank the spirits for mercy. Abraham's heart swelled with relief and thankfulness as he realized he was truly safe and among friends again, and he wondered what precious lesson this magical night would teach him when the morning sun came up. Later that night, after all the excitement had calmed, Abraham lay on a mat in his little house, unable to sleep but feeling very grateful. His body was tired, but his mind was still swirling with everything that had happened. He thought about how kind Mama Ajiro and the chief and all the villagers had been to forgive him so quickly once he apologized. He remembered the legend of the heroic snail and understood why the people of Agbada cherished those little creatures so much. In his heart, Abraham felt a warm glow of belonging. This village had accepted him as one of their own, teaching him their ways and forgiving his mistake. He also felt a pang of homesickness for his family far away, but he knew if his mother were here, she would hug him tight and say she was proud of him for learning and growing. A single tear slid down Abraham's cheek as he whispered a thank you to the silent night. "I will never forget this night," he said softly to himself. He promised that from now on he would always respect the beliefs and traditions of others, no matter where he went. Outside his window, fireflies blinked, and a cool breeze rustled the trees where the snails slept safely on wet leaves. Abraham closed his eyes, his breathing calm and even. As he drifted off to sleep, he smiled, thinking of the little snail that forgave him. He felt lucky to have found a second home here in Agbada, a place so different from his own, yet so full of love and lessons. It had been a truly emotional, funny, and wild adventure. And as Abraham finally began to dream, he wondered what new wonders and stories tomorrow would bring, knowing in his heart that he would always carry the wisdom of the sacred snails with him wherever he went, eager to see what happens next. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like, and comment for more interesting stories.